Hello everyone and welcome to Total Quilter Monthly for March 2020. And my name is Mark Garretts. I'm a National Floriani educator. And this month we're going to be talking about working with cut files. Now what exactly are cut files? Cut files are what we send to a craft cutter. What are craft cutters? Those are things like a Silhouette Cameo, Brother Scan & Cut, Cricut Explore or Maker, Artistic Edge, and many more others that are out there. Cutters work with what are known as vector files, which are made up of lines and not images or pixels like we take a picture with our phone. So vector files are different kinds of files. Again, they're made up of lines that a cutter knows how to follow to cut what we want. In Floriani software, we refer to vectors several different ways. Normally they're called artwork, but they can also be called outlines, lines, shapes, or vectors. They are all vectors. These are all terms that we use to refer to vector files, and I'll show you some of these in a minute. All the cutters out there primarily can use SVG files these days, but the other format for vector files that is common is FCM, which is the proprietary format for the Brother Scan & Cut. Your Total Quilter or My Decorative Quilter can output files for either of these formats. Now I'm going to be showing you some things in Total Quilter today, but this is more of just a lecture rather than a follow along. So if you want to try and follow along you can, but it's not really necessary. So just sit back and relax and listen to what I've got to teach you today. So what do we do with vector cut files? What do we do with them? Well, primarily when we're talking about Total Quilter or My Decorative Quilter, we are primarily cutting appliques. And you can also, if you have Total Quilter, actually cut quilt block pieces if you have your cutter set up correctly, and I'll refer you to your cutter information and directions on how to do that. So that's beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today. But primarily we're going to look at working with appliques. So I've got my Total Quilter open, and I'm going to open up some files that I created for this. I created an applique file. It's a pretty simple file. I'm going to turn it to 3D. And it's just a little face that I made using the parts and pieces of Total Quilter. So this outside piece here, this is an applique. If we expand it over here in our sequence view, and you can see it's an applique. I'll expand it one more time. You can see I've got a placement line, a tack down line, and then finally my finishing line. And what I've got back here is a piece of pink fabric being displayed. Now what I want to do is be able to cut this piece of pink fabric. So I need a circle, a vector, that is the shape of that fabric. And when you create something in Total Quilter or My Decorative Quilter or any Floriani software, you're going to have a master file that we call a WAF file. And underneath this object, which is a applique, there are vectors. You won't see them. You won't see them over here. These all look like stitches. But if I come over here to my left-hand menu and click my shape tool, you'll see what I have displayed is the vector line under here that defines this applique shape. So this is the outside of the circle, and this is also what is used to create the placement line, and the tack down line is inset from this, and then of course our finishing line offsets on both sides of it to cover it. But what we want to cut is basically this circle, this vector, this original line that we used to create this circle. And it's still there in a WAF file, and I can export this line as a vector file in order for me to cut it. So if I have the WAF file or created it myself, it's very, very simple. I just would select that object, or I don't even have to select it. I'll show you this in a second. And I can click this icon right here, which is unique to Total Quilter or My Decorative Quilter, and it's called Cut Preview. And if I click it with that selected, what happens is I get a new design window that shows me the vector. Now this is not an applique anymore. This is a vector. If I click on it, it's artwork. Again, artwork is a vector. It's filled. If I unfill it, I can, it brought the fabric with it. So if I do this, I can remove the fabric. No, that's the wrong thing. I want to come all the way up to the top and click None. Remove it, took it out of the fabric library. I don't want to do that. So this is my vector here. Let me change the color so you can see it. It's a black line, and this is what I would cut. Now, I'm in this cut preview window here, and in the past, in previous versions of the software, in order to export this, I would actually have to come over here to the File menu and click Export. But if you look closely here, you'll see that Export and also Import are missing. They're no longer here. What we've done is we have just gotten rid of the whole concept of import-export, and we're just going to be able to now save or open a vector file directly, just like we would a stitch file. Now we control whether it's a stitch file or a vector by the file type. So if I were to come up here and click Save As, I would get Design 2. I could rename it to whatever I want. I'm not actually going to save it, so I'm not going to bother to do that. I'm going to click the down arrow. If I scroll all the way down to the bottom, I see here I've got SVG files, FCM files. I also have two other vector formats, HPGL and AI. AI is Adobe Illustrator, and HPGL is an old style plotter language that some cutters can also use. But typically what we want to use these days is primarily SVG files or FCM files. So if I just select that and I save it, I will get just this as an SVG file. And then I can send this to my cutter to cut my applique. Now, when I did that, I just simply had that. I'm going to delete this file here. I had this selected. What happens if I don't have it selected? What happens if I just click Cut Preview? Okay, well, the exact same thing happens, because what it does is it picks up the first object that it has an underlying vector for, or piece of artwork, and sends that to the Cut Preview. What if I had more than one thing I wanted to cut? Like, for example, what if I wanted to cut this big piece, and I wanted to cut two little pieces for the eyes? Even though these aren't applique objects, if I just want to cut this and cut this, oops, wrong thing. Let me unselect that. Let me start again. I'm going to cut here. I'm going to select here. Whoops, I keep selecting the wrong thing. Let me start again. I'll click way out here so I don't accidentally select it. Okay, so I just want to cut these three things. If I go to my Cut Preview, I will have those three things. And of course, I wouldn't want to cut it this way. I'd want to move these off to the side, maybe copy and paste them to a new window to cut them separately. And you could do that in separate steps simply by selecting this one first and then selecting these two and doing the Cut Preview. So that's how that works. Now, what happens if I have the whole thing selected? So let me select everything. I'll do that by coming over to my sequence view and selecting all items. And then I actually just go, I don't even do a Cut Preview. I just say File, Save As, and we'll come down and save it as an SVG file on my desktop. Okay, so I'm going to save it as Applique SVG. Now let's go ahead and open that. So I'm just going to come here to Open. So I no longer have to do any kind of a import or export. There's my SVG file. I can select it. I can see right here I've got a bunch of stuff that I don't want, but let's go ahead and open it. And you can see what I've got is I've got all the lines here for all the things that were in that file, and that's a lot of stuff that I actually don't want to cut. I could delete this stuff in the middle and just cut this outline, but that's not the way you want to work. Okay, so that's how you would, from a WAF file anyway, go ahead and generate your cut files. Now, when you buy an applique, you don't get the WAV file usually, unless you get it from Floriani. You would get a stitch file, like a PES file. So let's go ahead and open a stitch file. I've saved this as a stitch file. I've used the PES format, and I can see my preview of it right here. And right here's the very important thing, this little convert to outlines box. Now we get more questions about this on our forums and in support than anything else. When you open a stitch file without convert to outlines checked, here's what you get. Okay, so I'm going to open it, and I've got this stitch file. I'll turn it to 3D so it's a little easier to see. So I've got this stitch file, but if I come over here and look at these items, what I've got is stitches. Okay, I've got different colors. I've still, retained my different colors for my applique steps, but all I've got is stitches. So if I try to do my cut preview with this, it's not going to know what to do. It just gives me blanks because it's got no underlying artwork there. It's not a high-level run stitch object here, or applique object. It is just simply stitches. So there's not anything I can do with this to create my vector file. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, because the way you want to open this is you want to open it with convert to outlines checked. When I can check convert to outlines and I open it, what I get is, I opened the SVG file. I'm sorry, my mistake. One more time. Let's open the PES file. PES, convert to outlines, open. Remember, there's no import export anymore. And now I don't actually have a high-level applique object, but what I do have is, for example, a run object. And in Floriani, if it's a run object, it has an underlying vector. I can see that. If I turn on my shape tool, I can see the points of that vector. I know it's a little hard to see here with that. Let me just hide that outline so you can see the vector a little bit better. We go back to shape mode. So, okay, so you can see my vector lines on the outside there. So I can adjust that shape, but more importantly, what I can do now, if I've got that run stitch selected, and I'll go ahead and unhide my stitch here, my steel stitch, I'm going to go back to my run and just select that. Now if I select cut preview, what I've got is that vector, and now I can save this as a cut file. Okay, so that is how you work with cut files for appliques in Total Quilter or My Decorative Quilter. Now in Total Quilter, there's one more important thing that we do with cut files, and that is we use them to cut the pieces we need for either an appliquilt block or an applique block. And the way we do that typically is we will come up here to one of our export icons, and I've loaded a simple block in here for you. So I'm going to export this as an appliquilt block. When I do that, I get my export here, and I have an option for cut files. If I check that and I choose either SVG or FCM, I will get my cut files. If I choose a page size, and this is going to relate to the size of our cutting mat typically, that we will go ahead and try to put as many of the same color on a page as we can to make it easier to cut. And I can also choose to import those files, and if I check that, what happens is that it brings them into Total Quilter so I can preview them, and I can also save them as a WAV file. So I'm going to go ahead and check import files, and I'm going to click export. Now before I do that, I want to let you know that if you have the version that I'm using, which is the current release as of my date that I'm recording this, which is mid-February 2020, if we still have that version, which is version 3600, build 3600, out there and we haven't updated it, there is a slight bug in the way this works, and I'm going to show you right now how to work around it until we get it fixed. If you click cut files and you have import files checked, or you don't, this really doesn't matter, but I want to show you what happens when you do. And it doesn't matter what file format you have, and you click export, it's going to try and export all of those files. And when it does, it brings up a folder to show you where it put all those files. And it put them in Design 7. I didn't bother to do that. And here's my output of my whole block in WAF format. This is the stitch file that I need. And these are the two WAF files that I generated in the cut files. But you'll notice there's no cut file section, no cut files in this folder. And you'll notice that it tried to open those cut files here, but it opened two files, but they are completely blank. There's no cut file information there. So I'm actually just going to close them. So that's the bug. It's not outputting the cut files. And I'm going to bring my folder back up here. And I'm going to show you what you do to work around this. So first of all, when you do that export, it's important to have the WAF file part checked. The import files you can leave unchecked. But you want to have these WAF files checked. Now all we need to do to get our cut files is open these up and output or save them as the cut file. So how do we do that? Well, if you have, like I do, all the Floriani software, if I double click this to open it, I'm going to get it into FTCU, which is fine. I can save the cut file from there. But if you don't have it, it might open up in here if you double click it. But here's an easy way to get it right back into what's open. I'm just going to take, for example, this corn silk, click and drag it on top of my open window here, and it's going to open up a new window with those cut files. I'll do the same thing with the deep violet. It's going to open up a new page. Don't worry, it's not going to add it to the page that's open. I don't need this anymore. I'm going to close it. So here's my cut file for the main triangle, and here's my cut file for the excuse me, that was a diamond, triangles for the corners, all right? And you can see it's added seam allowances and things to them. If I like the way this is arranged, I can leave it. One of the cool things is now here I can rearrange it if I want to put them close together, if I want to rotate them, say 45 degrees to get a smaller piece of fabric, I can do that. I can arbitrarily rotate them and put them closer together even. I can put this one in here maybe. So you could do things like that. And when you get ready to save it, all you need to do is come up here to either save, which is just going to save it as a WAF file. That won't get you anywhere. You might want to do that, but what you want to do is click File, Save As, and then once again come here to my file types, come down to either SVG or FCM, depending on what you want to do, and save it as those two different types of file depending on what cutter you have. And that's the workaround for the bug in Total Quilter until we get it resolved. So that does it for this month. I want to invite you to come back next month for our next installment of Total Quilter Monthly. And I want to, of course, thank you for watching.